All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Nazir Daf Ches, beginning with the very first word on the page, and on the Amud Beis, ending with the very last word on the page, a Rameir Shapira Daf, I think as they are called. And we'll be learning one full Mishnah cleanly beginning to end. The Mishnah writes on the top of Ches Amud Aleph, Hareni Nazir Kisei Roshi Uchafar Haaretz Uchechol Hayam. A person speaks in hyperbole, and they say that they would like to become a Nazir as it relates to the number of hairs on the head, like the afar, like the dirt of the land, ukechol hayam, and like the grains of sand by the water. So the halacha is, yes, but this is the actual source. We saw it quoted out of context. Yeah, correct.
You can't ask this question.
You can ask any question you want, Stan, but that question wasn't a good question. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, text was not tolerating it. That's for sure. So yeah, we saw this out of context. This is where it actually belongs. So if a person says one of these claims of some degree of hyperbole, harez Nazir olam, then the halacha is that they're Nazir olam. Umegaleach achas l'shloshim yom. They're Nazir olam, and they can get a haircut every 30 days. We already saw other opinions on the 30 days, 12 months, a week, a different sheet. That's fine. In contrast to the Tanakama, Rebbe Omer ein ze megaleach achas l'shloshim yom. If a person says that they are a Nazir, kisei aroshi, the three things in the beginning, he says that's not once every 30 days. You're done. No more haircuts for you. If you want to be in the category of Nazir Olam, your language needs to be different. When would a person make a neder and therefore be in a scenario of a Nazir Olam where they're getting a haircut every 30 days? Instead of saying Harini Nazir, it has to be Ha'omer Hare Alai Niziruyos, according to the Girsa change. I have many Niziruyos in correlation with Kisei Roshich of Harar Suchechol Hayam. If you want to have a Nazir Olam that has a haircut every 30 days, it has to be, I hereby accept upon myself these many Nazirios based on the hairs on my head. Then you have every 30 days. But the language of the Tanakama was different. The Tanakama writes, Hareni Nazir, not Naziriyos. I am a Nazir like the hairs on the head. Those are two different scenarios. So that is the Machlokas in the Tanakama and Rebbe, and that's case one in our Mishnah. We'll be discussing this at length. Case number 2, 6-7 lines down on Ches Amud Aleph. Hareni Nazir, Melo Habayis or Melo Hakupa. I am a Nazir with as much as this house can hold or as this box can hold. So then, Bod Kenoso, we check. Im Amar Achas Gedola Nazarti. If you ask him afterwards, you said, what did you really mean? When you said the whole house, what did you really mean? Give us, what were you thinking about? So he said, if he says, I really just meant accepting one big Nazirus upon myself, then Nazir Lamed Yom. No problem. So you spoke in some hyperbole, but it was an unclear hyperbole, so we ask you. The Imamar Stam Nazarti. If you say, I was just, I'm just talking Nazirus. I wasn't one, I was talking the way I was talking. So then, and here's the line that's going to take some of our time today. Roan Esakupa, we look at that box that he said his Nazirus is going to correlate to whatever's in the box. Roan Esakupa ki iluhi malea chardal, the Nazir kol yama. We view the contents of that empty box as though they are filled with mustard seeds that are particularly small. Each one of those mustard seeds is a Nazirus, and because there are thousands of them, your whole life is now a life of Nazirus. That's if you say the vague language of Hare Alai Nazirus. It's not Hare Alai, is it? Hareni Nazir Meloha Kupa. Case 3. In this case, we also saw earlier, but out of context, third of the way down. Hareni Nazir Mikanad Makom Ploni. If a person says, I would like to become a Nazir based on where I am up until the place that I'm going, Omden, we make an assessment. How far is the distance? If the walk that I have to take is less than 30 days, 29, 28, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, any of those. So then the halacha is if it's pachos, then it's Nazir Lamed Yom, then we treat your Nazirus as a regular 30-day Nazirus. And if your trip is 31, 32, 100, 200, 500 days, whatever the trip is, Nazir Kiminyan Hayamin. All right, case number 4. Hareni Nazir Kiminyan Mosachama. If a person accepts Nazirus upon themselves, like the days of the solar year, 365 days, Mona Nazirus Kiminyan Mosachama, then that's your Nazirus. And Omar Rabbi Yehuda says, Maisahaya, there was a story like this, and Kevan Shehishlim Mace, when he finished his Nazirus, he died. So what was the case of Hareni Nazir Kiminyan Mosachama? He had 365 units of 30-day Nazirus.
Whoa.
So that's 30 years. That's not 100 years. It's 30 years. So I'm 42. So if I accepted such a thing upon myself, which I'm not, by the way, but had I done it, then when I'm 72 in a little bit, then I can get a haircut again. Okay.
So
That would not be Gishmak. What?
Is that what changes it? Because usually when you say Yemos Hachama, it really means from Pesach to Sukkot.
Kiminyan Yemos Hachama. This is different.
Completely changes.
We'll see that word is a very particular word. Yeah, because otherwise, you're right, it could be seasonal, but certainly here the intent is 365. So the Gemara is bothered. We had said that if you say Melo HaKupa, that we then assume that what was in the kupa was a very, very small product of mustard seeds. Why didn't you assume that they were oversized cucumbers or eggplants or watermelons? Because every mustard seed is a 30-day Nazirus. So why were we under the assumption? The Gemara asks this outright. Here's the quote, we're halfway down on Chesed and Aleph. We said in our Mishnah, Roan es hakupa ki'ilu melech chardal v'nazir kol yama. But why? Ve'amai. V'lechazia ki'ilu melech kishun udulim. Maybe there's some pumpkins in there. Maybe there's some gourds in there, some eggplants. V'tehava le'takanta. And that way, at least he can get out in his lifetime, in a short span of time. Let's say you can hold 20,000 mustard seeds and one pumpkin, right? That's a big nafkamina. One is that you're a Nazir your whole life, and the other is that you're a Nazir for 30 days. So why is it that the Mishnah went like all out and said, we're going to pick the smallest consumed product that would fill a kupa? It's like the atoms in the air. Like, why would you do that? Why would you make it that it's a permanent scenario for him without any takana? To this, the Gemara answers, Amar Chizkiya b'machlokes shinuya. The answer to this can be found in the following machlokes, and our Mishnah is in line with Reb Shimon. Okay, what's the case scenario? To Amar Adam, machneses atzmo ledavar shesveiko chamer mivado. There are times that a person enters themselves into a scenario where a case of safek is more strict than a case of vadai. What is that case? Tanya, the Brisa writes, Hareini Nazir, a person says that he would like to accept Nazirus upon himself, al manas, on the condition that that if in this pile of food that I've harvested, that I've collected from the field, that if there would be 100 kur, 100 units of food. Okay, so that was his conditional acceptance of Nazirus. He said this while he was sitting in his dining room. Then he goes outside to check and see if he actually is a Nazir or not. He doesn't know. So what does he do? He goes, and his conditional Nazirus is it's thin air. We don't even know. It's not that he isn't; it's that we don't know, because he made a conditional neder. He is a Nazir if there's 100 kur in the creed. So what do? This is a machlokes tanaim. And 6 lines from the bottom, 7 lines, Reb Shimon Oser. Reb Shimon says everything is forbidden. Shesafek Nazirus lahachmir. When we have a scenario like this one of a conditional neder of Nazirus, and we have no way of answering the question of whether or not he's taka a Nazir, it's really a pure safek. In scenarios of safek Nazirus, the halacha is lahachmir. I'm asking my own question. Why isn't this just regular classical safek d'oraisa l'chumra? Is this a new principle, or is this a reflection of an old principle? So that would be a worthwhile conversation. Is this something special by Nazirus, or is it a regular din of safek d'oraisa l'chumra? This is the sheet of Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda Matir, shesafek Nazirus lahakel. So now this already gives a little bit of color to what I said before. This isn't the regular rules of safek d'oraisa l'chumra, because Reb Shimon violates that rule with this rule and says it's safek Nazirus lahakel. Now, let's pause here for a moment. According to Reb Shimon, safek Nazirus is lahachmir. He must be the author of our Mishnah, because in our Mishnah, what does it say? It says that we look at that kupa as though it is malea chardal, and he's a Nazir kol yama. Why did Reb Shimon say that? Why does our Mishnah say that? Our Mishnah says that because Reb Shimon holds that way. Where does Reb Shimon hold that? Safek Nazirus lahachmir. So whenever we have a safek about Nazirus, we have to take it to the nth degree. That was the presentation in this brisa. There are some sveikos that are more severe than the actual neder itself. The actual neder itself was that he'd be a Nazir if there's 100 kur. What was the neder? 30-day Nazirus based on 100 kur. That's it. What are we saying? You're a Nazir forever. That's because the chumrah is greater than the actual scenario. So answer number one of the Gemara: why is it that we're talking about a machmir scenario in our Mishnah where we view the empty box as being filled with chardal seeds, with mustard seeds? The answer is because our Mishnah is in line with Reb Shimon, and Reb Shimon holds safek naziros lahachmir. Now Rav Yochanan says that's not true. Not that we don't agree about Reb Shimon, but he says that our case is very different than the machlokes of Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda. How so? Reb Yochanan Amar afidu tema Reb Yehuda. That's not true. Our Mishnah would even be according to the lenient opinion of Reb Yehuda of safek nazirus lahakel. How could that be? Says the Gemara, because hasam lo nachisle lenazirus. In the case that's presented as a machlokes Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda, what was our case? The case was a conditional neder of nazirus. See, here we don't even know if the mechanics of the neder actually played out. We know what you said, but we don't know what was in the kri. We don't know if his condition was met. If the condition's met, he's a nazir. If it's not, he's a zero, right? We just don't know. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says these cases are not comparable because in that case, as mentioned, that case is a case of conditional nazirus. However, hacha in our Mishnah, nachis leila nazirus. In our Mishnah, there's no question that he's going to be a nazir because what did he say? Hareni nazir malo habayis or malo hakupa. And bodkin also, we come up with the formula. So in our Mishnah, there's no question that he's going to be a nazir. Masha'ain Kain, where there's a person who says a conditional nazirus, and that which would answer whether or not the condition was met is missing, we pasha don't know. So the cases are not similar at all. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda would have to be of the opinion, just like Reb Shimon, of safek nazirus. The only time he would employ safek nazirus, lehakel Rabbi Yehuda, when is that true? Only when there's a condition in place. Because the condition introduces a real safek as to whether or not there's even nazirus. That safek doesn't exist in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, you're a nazir. In this case, we don't know if you're a nazir. Very different cases. And therefore, in our case, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that the box is theoretically filled with chardal seeds, and therefore, one would be a nazir for his whole life. After all, b'mailis luke minei. In our Mishnah, what could he have done to remove himself from the nazirus? We know he's a nazir. There is no introduction of a safek in our Mishnah like there is in the Brisa brought at the bottom of the page, because at the bottom of the page there was a condition added into the code, added into his language, and therefore the cases are not comparable. So says the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom, I understand, but I also don't understand. I understand why you're saying Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda might agree in our Mishnah because the cases are different. That I understand. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, why would Rabbi Yehuda say, "Amai lo lechazi lekupa kilu malei kishur v'dilun v'tehavale takanta"? Why wouldn't we assume that according to Rabbi Yehuda that it should be kishun and dilun as opposed to chardal? We understand that Reb Shimon, his wiring is that way. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda could approach this differently. After all, Hasal Kadaitach Nazirus Hu Dekabilale. After all, he did accept upon himself some form of Nazirus. We're not denying that, but no one in their right mind would ever accept one with 1 billion chardal seeds. So maybe we should go back to the reasonable. So we already answered for Reb Shimon. We're asking the same question again on Rabbi Yehuda. That brings us to the top of Chesamid Beis, and the Gemara says. By the way, I should just add, there's a machlokas Rashi Tosfos here or whatever, the Rivan and Tosfos, as to whether or not this bottom line of Hasal Kadaitach is part of the question still, or part of the answer. Ayin Sham in Rashi, Ayin Sham in the Tosfos, the Balei Tosfos 3 lines from the bottom writes, Umeshani, we answer, meaning the beginning of the answer is at the top of the next page, and the Rivan here on the bottom line does not say that. So machlokes in what the flow of the Gemara is. Either way, on the top of Chesamid Beis, the Gemara responds, why is it that Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that we should say that the box is Melo Chardal and not Melo Kishonu Deluin? Namely, why are we saying that there's no way to rectify this difficult scenario for him and he's going to be a Nazir his whole life? Because, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, Savar La Ke Rebbe. Rabbi Yehuda holds like the opinion of Rebbe, Ditznan. We just saw this in our Mishnah. Rebbe Omer, Ein Ze Megaleach Achas L'Shloshim Yom. Ve'ezeh Shemegaleach Achas L'Shloshim Yom. Ha'omer harei alai nazirus kisei aroshi u'che'afar ha'aretz u'kechol hayam. That's a quote from our Mishnah. The Tanakama was of the opinion that in a case where a person says hareini nazir, like these very minuscule things like hair on the head and dirt of the earth and sand at the beaches, in those kinds of cases, the Tanakama was of the opinion he's a nazir olam. And here Rebbe says that's not megalech achas l'shloshim yom. That person's a nazir forever. Why? Because he said Hareini Nazir in a general language. And Rabbi Yehuda is in the same exact boat. Because what's the case that we had in our Mishnah? A person said in our Mishnah that Hareini Nazir Melo HaKupa. Hareini Nazir in the singular, not Nazirus. So it's one very long Nazirus. That's the Shita of Rebbe. Rebbe would say, as he did in the Reisha of our Mishnah, that if a person says Hareini Nazir like the sand, like the grains of sand on a beach, he's a Nazir forever. That's Rabbi Yehuda over here, that it has to be the chardal seeds. It can't be a solvable box of vegetables. It has to be an unsolvable box of vegetation, and therefore it has to be like chardal. And that's a shita of Rebbe, and Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda learns our Mishnah the way he does. The Gemara now questions this answer and says, wait 1 second, 4 lines down on Chesed Beis, Rabbi Yehuda, misavar laki Rebbe. Does Rabbi Yehuda actually hold like Rebbe? And here the Gemara presents 2 challenges to the assertion that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe. Number 1, v'hatnan, Hareini Nazir, our Mishnah says at the very bottom of our Mishnah on Chesed Aleph, it quotes this line. We had said that if a person accepts Nazirus upon themselves, communion in Mosachama, we had said that they then are Nazirim for 365 units of 30, which is 30 years. What did the Gemara say after that? The Gemara said, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maisahaya, V'kevan shehishlim meis. There was a story that Rabbi Yehuda quoted that there was a person who actually did this, where he had said, Hareini Nazir communion Mosachama, and he kept 30 straight years of Nazirus, and then he finally finished his Nazirus, and he died. He was just telling a story. He was just, by the way, on that note, he was just sharing a story. So says the Gemara, if you want to say that what he was accepting was 365 times 30, now we understand the realities of the story, that there was a conclusion to his Nazirus. He lived for 30 more years at least, and then he died. We got it. If you want to say, like Rebbe, that it's Chada Nazirus Kabili Labe. Remember, Rebbe Shita is that you're a Nazir forever in those cases. Of Hareini Nazir about the hair and the dirt and the sand, you're a Nazir forever in those cases. Iamris, that you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda is really like Rebbe, that's a problem. Because how could Rabbi Yehuda then tell a story of Mihave Hashlama Klau? What do you mean? If Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, then the Nazirus never ends. It's chardal in the basket. Yet the story of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah is a story with an endpoint. 365 units of 30, and he lived 30 years. He finished his hashlama. He finished. So if you say that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, then the Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah makes no sense at all, because that means Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rebbe, because Rebbe would never agree to what Rabbi Yehuda just said. There is no hashlama in such a case. He'd never finish ever, because Rebbe says no. Rabbi Yehuda says yes. That's number 1. And number 2, a third of the way down. And furthermore, Misavar Rebbe asking the same question again, highlighting the fact that there's another question. It could have just said Ve'od. I think we're seeing some of the unique languages of Nadarim carry over into Nazirus. There are some uniquenesses we've seen so far, and this is one of them. After all, how do we know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rebbe? Questioning our answer from the top of the page, because the Gemara says, Vatanya, the Brisa writes, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, if a person says Hareini Nazir, minyan, hilkate kayetz, here the person is talking about the number of piles from a fig harvest. Hilkate, the gatherings of kayetz. Kayetz, we had this word. We know kayetz typically means summer, but here it's a direct reference to harvesting figs. So if a person says he's a Nazir according to the piles of figs, or uminyan shibale shmita, or according to the piles of shmita, so says the Gemara, Mona Naziros, Kiminyan Hilkati, Kayetz, Uchaminyan Shibal Shmita. We go out in the field and we count. Oh, there's 18 piles of this and 14 piles of that, 18 times 30 plus 14 times 30. Simple algebraic math equation, and you're a Nazir for a long time. Well, hold on a second. Rabbi Yehuda shouldn't hold that way. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, and you say a line like this, you should be a Nazir forever. Another contradiction in terms. Says the Gemara, no. The second case is not a good argument because minyan shiny. What did Rabbi Yehuda say in this case? I'm telling you an exact number. The number of piles of figs. That's how many times I'm accepting Naziris upon myself. The number of piles of Shemitah, whatever it is, it's a fixed number. Naziris according to the number of chairs in the room. Count the chairs in the room. So the Gemara says you can't say the Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rebbe when something is actually countable. What isn't countable? The sand, the hair, and the dirt. That's uncountable. So there's a difference in those cases. Says the Gemara, but the difference that you're making doesn't work. Why? Because almost halfway down, Umi Shiny Le the Rebbe minion, does Rebbe actually care if that item is countable? After all, says the Gemara, B'hatanya, Hareini Nazir, Kiminyan Yamosachama. A person says that they are a Nazir like the days of the solar year. Mona Nazirus, Kiminyan Yamosachama. That's countable, right? This is the Tanakama, not Rebbe. Or Kimei Halavana, like a lunar year, which is shorter, 354 days. Then Mona Kimei Halavana. What does Rebbe say on this? I disagree. Rebbe Omer, it's not enough just to have something that's countable. It also has to be in concert with a plural language of these Nazirios are with me. So if you say Hareini Nazir, Kiminyan Mosachama or Kiminyan Mosalavana, one, that's going to be the number of days times 30. But Rebbe says that it will be 1 unit in that case. He argues with the Tanakama. So therefore, the Gemara says Rebbe Huda and Rebbe are really not exactly the same for a number of different reasons. And the Gemara responds a little bit more than halfway down. You're right, and you're right, and you're also right. And really what the Gemara is saying is that Rebbe Yehuda savar la kavase bechada, upaleg ale bechada. Rebbe Yehuda disagreed with Rebbe in one place and agreed with him on another. Let's see how this plays out. Savar la kavase bechada, that Nazirus kabilale. He agrees that there's most definitely a Nazirus here. However, upaligale, he argues bechada that what? It's either Rebbe Yehuda shani le mone, Rebbe lo shani le mone. That when it comes to Rebbe Yehuda, he's of the opinion that if that which you make a neder about is countable, then we count and multiply by 30. Rebbe would not say that. Rebbe would only say countable works if the language was not Nazir but Nazirus, a plural language. Otherwise, Rebbe looks at the word Nazir and says, you're done. That's it. Very simple, cut and clean, very simple. When do we do the multiplying for Rebbe? It's when you have something measurable in number of chairs in this room, and you say the plural language of Nazir. So therefore, we started this question of the Gemara of how do we answer our Mishnah? What's with the Chardal? So answer number 1 was that our Mishnah is like Reb Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan says, terrible comparison. It's not like Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon's case has a condition. Our Mishnah doesn't have a condition. Our Mishnah says Rabbi Yochanan could even be Rabbi Yehuda. How can our Mishnah be Rabbi Yehuda? After all, what about Rebbe? Rebbe obviously holds like Rebbe, and the Gemara then goes to the Shaklavatari we just learned to highlight that yes, it's true that Rabbi Yehuda does hold like Rebbe, but not everywhere, only in certain cases. That brings us 2/3 of the way down to the 2 dots, and the Gemara quotes some brises we've already seen in a couple of new ones. Pay attention to some Aramaic/Greek words that we have in our modern world. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught us in a brisa, Hareini Nazir kol yimei chayai. If a person says that they want to be a Nazir their whole life, Hareini Nazir olam, or they say they want to be a Nazir forever, Harei a Nazir olam. We learned this already. Afilu me'ashana, afilu elaf shanim. What if they say for 100 years or for 1,000 years? Ein zen Nazir olam. That's not Nazir olam. Because when you say kol yimei chayai or harei, we don't know how long that is. We don't know how long you're going to live. But when you say 100 years or 1,000 years, that's not Nazir olam. That's Nazir li olam. That's forever. No haircuts. You're done for the rest of your life. Tanu Rabbanan. If a person says Hareini Nazir and they add the word ve'achas, says the Gemara, Mona Shtaim, that's 2 30-day units of Nazirus. What if a person then says ve'od? They say Hareini Nazir ve'achas ve'od. So then the din is Mona Shalosh. That's 3 sets of 30 days. What if he says Vishuv? So he says Hareini Nazir ve'achas ve'od and Vishuv. So then the Gemara says Mona Arba. Says the Gemara, Pshita, every time you talk, every time you open your mouth, you're going to be in trouble again. Every single time. Why? Ve'od, Vishuv. Okay, Pasha, we get it. We understand the formula. It's the Chacham can look, he can see, he can look around the bend. Oh, every time I talk, it's 30. So stop giving examples. We're smart people. So the Gemara says, Pshita, obvious. No, Ma'udatema, Vishuv. You might have thought that when he said Vishuv, he wasn't adding another 30. It was really Kikulhu. He was going back on the previous 3 and saying it's another 90, and therefore Kula V'Havile Shisa will be 6 straight in a row of Nazirus, Kamash Malan Delo, that all of these languages are isolated. They're not looking back on the previous set. In our language, you put parentheses around the first 3 and then say Vishuv. It's not exponential like that. It's not correct. It's not a multiplication into it. It's not like that. So that was the Gemara's point.
We discussed the last between saying the original Nazir and then 2 and another and another.
Oh no. Mm-mm. That's true. but that you're adding, that's the next sugya, but he wants, that's a different sugya. He wants to know straight up, like, is there toch kedei dibur, or do we have a, you know,
For one person being in combo on himself, two different with just Pa'apas or the shiur or whatever. So that you're saying that the shiur doesn't have to be toch kedei dibur of his very.
that was Stan's question. That's what, I don't know.
You would think if he reaches day 30 and about being the korban, and then he says.
If what?
If he's about being the korban on day 30.
Yeah.
And then he says to the coin.
The shuv. Yeah.
Right, it could be 30 days later, but chances are he's just taking upon himself another.
Yeah, seems like it. Well, it was like we saw Ahay, like remember we saw earlier in the parak, you know, like the context is everything. So if you're in a context, it's not every time you say Vishuv, you know, but it may well be that if the context does look like that, you know, you're standing there and you say Vishuv, I want to bring these korbanos again, which is what it looks like when you're standing with the Kohen. Very, very possibly. Toch kedei dibur is really something else. I don't think that applies here. I could be wrong, but I don't think that applies here. I don't think so.
Is this not only according to the Akiva, who learns the position in the Seirah?
This seems to be according to everybody. Yeah, this seems to be according to everybody. I mean, the Gemara doesn't distinguish. Yeah. Okay. Two more small sugyas. Tana Rabbanan Hareini Nazir. If a person says Hareini Nazir and then they're followed up by a couple of Greek words, Simchas Omer, if he says Hareini Nazir and then he adds the word Hain, that's Achas. Hareini Nazir Hain, that's 1. If he says Digun, that's Shtayim. If he says Trigon, that's Shalosh. If he says Tetragon, that's Arba. And Pontigon or Pentagon, as we would say in our language, Chamesh. So we look at other languages and we meld them together. So if a person says, I'd like to take 1 Nazirus upon myself, which would be Hain, you take 1 Nazir. So if a person says, I'd like to take 2, that's all the numbers. You just keep playing out. Tanu Rabbanon. A side din, this has nothing to do with our Masechta other than the play on language. Bais Agul, Digun, Trigun, Pontigon. If you have a building that is circular, has 2 walls, like a teepee, it's a trigon, it's a triangle, which is, again, the word looks almost identical, trigon, triangle. Pontigon, we skip 4 and go to 5, or it's a 5, it's a pentagon building, something that has 5 sides. Eino metame b'negoyim. That house is not susceptible to tumas negoyim. P.S. If you ever want to live in a house that never, just build it, add a 5th wall somewhere, like just have that one corner tuck a little bit, just a little bit. Because if you have 4 walls, that's the only way you're susceptible to negoyim. What? That's why what? Yes, correct, exactly right. Yeah, that's the musar. And tetragon metame b'negoyim. The 4th one does my taima. Why is it that only a 4-walled structure is subject to tumas negoyim? The Mishnah, the Gemara here concludes with some play on words, or really just some grammar. And with that, we'll finish the perek. Lamatahu Omer. Elsewhere it says kir kiros. The pasuk says kiros instead of just kir. And lamalahu Omer kir kiros. It says kiros twice. Kiros times 2. Kir plus kir plus kir plus kir is 4 walls. And therefore, midoraisa, there's no such thing as negoyim on a house unless it is a simple 4-walled structure. Baruch Hashem, we finished the first parak of Maseches Nazir. Hadran Allah kol kinuye yiratzon. We should finish the rest of Shas and come back to this in 7.5 years. Tomorrow is Wednesday. I will not be here. I'm going to record Emir Hashem mid-morning if all goes smoothly. And Thursday as well, I'll also try and record very early in the morning and post those. And then we should be back in Mir Hashem for Shabbos. Wishing you all a good couple of days. Take care.